Welcome to Developing an Outline. This PowerPoint presentation is designed to help students prepare an outline for either M17 Research and Writing or any other course that requires an outline or a written assignment. Outlines are great ideas whether or not they're required for a paper or not. But the purpose of an outline is to help organize your thoughts and keep everything focused on your thesis and move through the defense of that thesis step by step through the paper. So after you've done your research and you've begun to develop some ideas about what you want to write about, the first thing you need to do is write your thesis statement or develop your thesis. So what is your thesis? What exactly is involved in that? There's basically three parts of the thesis, even though they're all put together in one statement, and that is, what is the topic of your paper? And what do you want to say about your topic? Not just basic information, but here are all the details about my topic. And then what are you trying to persuade people to believe? So not only are you going to tell them about what you're writing about, but you're also going to try to convince them that your stance in this thesis is correct, and you're going to show support for that. So let's quickly look at an example from the Knights Hospitallers. When asked what the topic of a paper might be, it would be Knights Hospitallers. And then what do you want to say about Hospitallers? Well, Knights Hospitallers form the foundation of modern chaplaincy. And that makes sense. Well, what are you going to try to persuade people to believe based on what you've done, what you've developed from your research? And that is your thesis statement right here. It is that Crusades have had a long-term beneficial impact on Christendom by establishing the foundations for modern chaplaincy in the Knights Hospitallers, by linking medical care to spiritual care, and by establishing the church's role in the community. That's your thesis statement. That's what your paper is going to be about. And these are the points of your paper and the idea that you are going to defend in your paper. So keep that thesis statement in mind, because you're going to need to come back to it over and over again as you develop your paper. So after the thesis is developed, then you begin organizing your paper. The first Roman numeral in your paper is going to be the introduction. And the introduction needs to include about three things. It needs to provide background to your topic, and explain why it's a valuable topic to consider. And then it ends with your thesis statement that we just had on the previous slide. So your introduction provides a lot of good information for your reader about why you're writing this paper, what you have basically found out about the topic, and why you think all this information is valuable to consider. There's another video in the M17 course that talks about the necessary value of any paper you write. Don't just write a paper because it's required. Always try to contribute something valuable to the discussion about whatever your topic is. And then, of course, end your introduction with your thesis statement. So here's basically what the outline would look like in the first Roman numeral called introduction. You would start out with point A being the Crusades were a difficult time in the history of Christianity. Notice it's a full sentence. At Nations University, all outlines require full sentence structure. So don't say difficult times. Write it out. The Crusades were a difficult time in the history of Christianity. And what are the points about that outline or about that difficulty? Well, first, Crusaders faced many hardships, and that's derived from your research in Smith's book from 1999. Crusaders were not always welcomed in the lands they traveled. Castle in 2017 wrote about that. Crusaders needed medical and spiritual care during the Crusades. Jones, in his book in 2017, addressed that. And so your kind of final statement about that is Knights Hospitallers provided care to the Crusaders, and there's no reference for that. That's kind of your general statement. I would back up and point out that in all parenthetical documentation, the parenthetical citation, Smith, 1999, in parentheses, goes inside the period, not outside. Your citation is part of your sentence. If you put it outside of the period, then when you're writing your paper, people will be confused about which direction the citation goes. So citations always go inside the period of the sentence that you are referencing. So point B, understanding the role of the Knights Hospitallers in serving crusaders and civilians strengthens the missional mindset of modern chaplains. And so a point that you would discuss is during the war, everyone needs spiritual care. That's from APCE's website, 2020. Medical care without spiritual care does not provide wholeness. And again, from the APCE website. So you're kind of giving the background information to what you are about to discuss. This is important because everyone needs spiritual care, particularly during war or during other traumatic events in their life, which is, again, the foundation of chaplaincy. So then you come back to the end of your introduction and you insert your thesis statement once again. The Crusades have a long-term benefit in the rest of that sentence. So this is just the introduction, but you can already tell that it's very detailed and provides lots of good information about the background material, but it does so in fairly short order. You should be able to write this out, and your introduction may wind up being 2 pages long, about 10% of your 20-page paper for M17. That's very acceptable, very appropriate, and oftentimes needed. It may go a little bit longer than that, maybe a little shorter, but you need to make sure that you catch the writer's attention, the reader's attention or professor's attention, and help them to understand why you're writing about this topic and why it is valuable and important to continue reading. So once you kind of have an introduction to your paper, then you need to move on to the key points of your paper. And that initial organization is basically going to be Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, Roman numeral 4, Roman numeral 5, and on and on. You can have multiple points. If you grew up learning a 5-point essay with the introduction, 3 body points, and a conclusion, that's not going to get you very far in a 20-page paper. You may wind up with 5, 6, 7, 8 Roman numerals and even more as you organize your paper. And so in this one, you kind of write out, okay, my first point is going to be that the Crusades created a hostile environment in which the church was to work. Second point, they provide an environment in which spiritual care was tested. Fourth point, the service of the Knights Hospitallers reached beyond the Crusades to the community at large. And finally, the service of the Knights Hospitallers created a link between medical care and spiritual care. And these are just some of the first ways that you're organizing your paper, but it gives a lot of good information about what is going on in your paper. And anyone that looks at just your Roman numerals should be able to see the logic and the flow. We're going to talk about the hostile environment, the testing of spiritual care in that hostile environment, and then how the Knights Hospitallers addressed that spiritual care in that environment, and then the result of that in long-term chaplaincy and modern chaplaincy. So that's your first step is, okay, what are my main points? Put those out in Roman numerals. Then you have to develop those Roman numerals, right? You can't just leave an outline like this. So let's look at Roman numeral 2 in more detail, and then we'll just kind of expand it as we go along. So the Crusades created a hostile environment in which the church was to work. Why is that the case? Well, step 1, or point A under this, is not everyone agreed with the Crusades. Simpson, again, reference from his book in 2011, and then the period. And then subpoints. Leaders of some countries felt the Catholic Church had overstepped its bounds. Another supporting evidence, some countries thought the Crusades foreshadowed future church control. Smith talks about that in his book. So you see the details that you're putting in here, not just saying that not everyone agreed with the Crusades, but specific details, because these details are going to be developed into paragraphs and discussions about your topic. You can go on and write B, not all actions by crusaders were appropriate. That contributed to the hostile environment. Crusaders took supplies without paying, and then information. They took what they needed in the name of God, which clearly upset people. They made promises to pay, but never did. These are drawn from Smith's book. Crusaders acted inappropriately. Not all crusaders were Christian men, according to White. Some of them were just kind of conscripted into service. And even the many Christian men treated local women inappropriately. There are lots of stories recorded in Smith's earlier book in 2010 about the actions of the Crusaders. And this goes on and on. Every point gets expanded into an A and a B and a C and a D, and then the subpoints are listed below each one of those so that you can imagine that as you finish going through this, your paper, your outline is going to get very, very long. And that's one of the things that you need to realize up front is that they should be long and they should be detailed. If it's going to be a 20-page paper like it is in M17, or even if it's a 5-page paper, you need good detailed outline. Expect the outline to be about 1/3 to 1/2 the length of the paper. So again, a 20-page paper, you could have an outline that's 7 to 10 pages long. But think how easy it's going to be to write the paper if your outline is this detailed and this long. The completion of a full sentence outline should make the organization and points of your essay or paper extremely clear. When you turn in this outline to your professor in M17, then it is going to be, or should be, crystal clear what your paper is about. What is the flow from Roman numeral 2 to Roman numeral 3 to Roman numeral 4 and on and on. And within each section, what's the flow between A and B and C? And then what is the supporting evidence in each of those? When the professor reads the final paper, it should be a mirror image of your full sentence outline, just with more writing and more crafting of the essay. In fact, if you think about it, the outline serves as a first draft of your paper, but it does so without the need for the construction of paragraphs and the formatting of the paper. It is focused on the flow and the organization of the paper. It is making sure that your paper makes sense and that it accomplishes its purpose of persuading the reader that your thesis is correct. That's a lot of work, but it will pay off in the long run. So as you develop your essays in the future, or your outlines in the future for your future essays and your essays in M17, then make sure that you are well organized, that you have all of your citations ready, you have your research together, and then take the time to organize it. You may rewrite your outline 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. Your professor may send it back to you a couple of times, or 3 or 4 or 5 times, and say, I still don't understand what you're trying to convince me of. Give me more information, give me more detail, reorganize your thoughts. The flow is bad. You jump from point to point without being clear about it. So there's a lot to the outline, and it's a substantial part of your work in your essay. But once it is finished, you will be pleased and surprised at how quickly your paper will come into fruition and how good it will be, and what a great grade you can get if you put the work into it in advance. So good luck with your papers, and God bless.